What's up, guys? Election predictions 2020 here. And today's video will analyze if Donald Trump does win the 2020 presidential election. I want to look at the five biggest reasons why that might happen in 2020. So just a general overview. Next week, I'll be doing the opposite for Joe Biden. Five reasons why he could win in 2020. And in the video, I've listed the five main factors from least influential to most influential. And before I get in the video, just please like, subscribe, and comment. I definitely want some feedback on this new format that I'm trying out. All right, so the number five reason that I think that Donald Trump could win in 2020 is just his record. I think that before the coronavirus hit, the economy was doing very well. Unemployment was at all-time lows. The stock market was at all-time highs. Blue-collar wages were rising. And if we learned anything from Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential run, it's the economy, stupid. And I still think that despite the coronavirus happening, I still think that people will trust President Trump with the economy. And it will be hard for Joe Biden to run against Trump on the economy, and say that Trump's presidency wasn't good for the economy, because it was. And next up on his record is the conservative justices. This was the reason why a lot of Republicans who were unsure about Trump, who didn't support him in the primary, held their nose and voted for him in 2016. And I don't see anything changing in 2020. President Trump has nominated two conservative justices to the Supreme Court, in Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. And with Ruth Bader Ginsburg kind of on her last legs, I think that the same voters who turned out for him in 2016 will turn out for him in 2020, because they see the opportunity for Trump to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a more conservative justice. And next up is with taxes. President Trump passed or signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, which gave 80% of Americans a tax cut. Many people don't realize that 80% of Americans got a tax cut because the Democrats just railed against it. But I think that people will look at their tax returns and be like, hey, look, I'm paying less taxes. I might not like Trump's behavior, his rhetoric, but for an issue that affects me, President Trump has been pretty good. And then lastly, I would just say with cutting regulations in general, President Trump has been good for big business and even some smaller businesses by cutting this red tape. So I think that business owners and Wall Street will reward Donald Trump in 2020 by voting for him. And just some others more niche issues, like the First Step Act. Some people probably who maybe didn't vote for him in 2016 might vote for him in 2020 because he's committed to criminal justice reform. Right to try definitely doesn't affect a ton of people, but maybe a smaller group of people will vote for him. And overall, I think Donald Trump can run on this message of promises made, promises kept. You see he's already started to do it at some rallies. He does have a lot of accomplishments under his term, and Democrats would say, well, these aren't good accomplishments, but on the other side, Trump supporters are like, this is exactly why we put him into office. So I think the people that voted for him in 2016 will stay with Donald Trump and vote for him in 2020. And I think you'll definitely see Donald Trump pivoting to the issues of immigration and many different social issues that tend to get people to the ballot box. And he can say, look, I've started to build the wall. I've been really good for for the evangelicals of this country, etc. So next up, the number four reason, I think that Donald Trump has an electoral college advantage going into 2020 against Joe Biden. if you look at where he is now compared to where Donald Trump was in 2016, right before the election, versus Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump simply has better odds to win. In my previous video, when I looked at the gambling markets, Donald Trump has anywhere between the 45% to 60% chance of winning the 2020 presidential election. And the night before the 2016 election, 538, which had Donald Trump had him as his most favorable. They had him at a 28% chance to win, and the New York Times had him as low as a 5% chance to win. So people are not going to underestimate Trump, and I just think looking at it, if I were making this same video in 2016 compared to now, I'd say Donald Trump has a lot better chance to win now, and he still won in 2016. And that isn't to say that he's definitely going to win in 2020 because he has better odds than 2016, but it definitely improves his chances overall. And if you just look at his favorability ratings, you can see in the graph on the bottom, on election day, they were around 37% right here. That's between 2016 and 2017. And now they've been hanging around like 40 to 45%, and they've been pretty steady. So you could say that Donald Trump has actually gained some supporters over his presidency, which will be very good for his reelection in 2020. And also in 2016, you heard on the media that there's this blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that Donald Trump cannot break, and he has to break it to win. As we saw in 2016, this wall can be broken. And so I think that Donald Trump just has a lot more paths to victory in 2020. He can win through Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Minnesota and New Hampshire and Maine and Colorado and Nevada. So there's a lot more paths to victory. And I think a lot of Trump supporters are more hopeful in 2020 than in 2016. And I would say that, and this is gonna come to the surprise of many people, but Trump has actually unified the GOP, and I think you can see that in the his approval ratings going up over time. But there's many news articles with the headlines. It's Trump's party, or Trump has consolidated his base, and I think the Never Trumpers have left the Republican Party, and I think having more unity among the GOP is going to help him going into 2020, because maybe some Republicans won't be as ashamed for voting for him in the 2020 election. All right, next up, number 3 is that I do not believe that the scandals that happened in 2016 will stick in 2020. And the most prominent example, I think it could go down as the biggest October surprise in presidential history, was the Access Hollywood tape, in which Donald Trump made some very vulgar, crude, and frankly just rude comments about women. And I'm not going to repeat what he said, but this definitely negatively affected his campaign in 2016. There was media coverage for weeks. It was this came out about a month before the election, and even though he said these words in 2004, it shocked everyone. There's this shock and awe. And a lot of people, even among Republicans, were calling for him to drop out and let Mike Pence replace him. But as you remember, this happened right before the second debate. Before the second debate, he held a press conference with Bill Clinton's accusers, who had accused him of sexual assault and rape, and among other things. And this was actually it worked, people think, because, I mean, obviously Donald Trump won the election, but it deflected the attention from Trump to Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and how they have dealt with the same issues with Monica Lewinsky, etc. But I definitely think the Access Hollywood negatively impacted him. I think he would have won by a larger margin, if not for Access Hollywood. But in 2020, there is not going to be an Access Hollywood. This is already out there. People know about it, and the 2020 election is not going to be a referendum on the Access Hollywood tapes. Even though in 2016 this was at the forefront of people's attention. And same thing with the sexual assault allegations. I think up to around 20 women accused Donald Trump of sexual assault. And I think that this worried a lot of people. They didn't want to vote for an alleged someone who sexually assaulted people. But I think in 2020, this is not going to be at the forefront of people's imagination. And also, Joe Biden does have a sexual assault allegation. So, in terms of politics, you could be like, well, it's not going to weigh on people's mind if both of the party nominees have these allegations against them. And thirdly, I would say that in the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump was more unhinged. He called for a Muslim ban. If you remember in his first speech, he called some Mexicans rapists and criminals. I don't think he'll be doing this as much in 2020. And I think people maybe will have forgotten that he said these things in 2016, or it won't be fresh on their mind. And so I think because Donald Trump will be a less polarizing figure in 2020 than in 2016, you might see some moderate people come towards his way just after seeing his accomplishments in his first term and not really worrying about what he said in the 2016 campaign. And there are some other scandals that were in the media a lot in 2016. I don't think these will be in the media as much in 2020. And lastly, I remember 2016. There was a lot of segments like on MSNBC and CNN, and even some ads that some Democratic super PACs ran that Trump cannot be trusted with the nuclear codes. He's going to start a world war, like in this picture. And it was very similar to the ad that Lyndon B. Johnson ran against Barry Goldwater in 1964. And it was famously like the first negative political ad. But I mean, if you look back at these ads, it's kind of crazy because I mean, I definitely think people did fear that Donald Trump was so his behavior could go all over the place. He was so erratic. Like maybe some people really feared that Trump would start a War III and maybe drop a nuke, and it would be crazy. But I think that in 2020, I mean, since he hasn't done these things, you can't really run these negative campaign ads for Trump. And I think that these might have been effective campaign ads in 2016, but simply because Trump has not even come close to launching a nuke in his first term as president, these campaign ads will not be as effective in 2020, and they just won't be run. All right, guys, and if you want to see the number 2 and number 1 reason, before I get to that, if you'd go to the bottom right-hand corner of the screen and go over the subscribe button, and if you would please subscribe to my channel. And then also on the screen should be the link for part 2 of this video. So enjoy. Thanks.